Good afternoon. A grand welcome for President Obama, first at the airport, where locked in a hug. That was the image that started President Obama's 3-day visit to India. And then, of course, was the ceremonial welcome at Rashtrapati Bhavan, the full glory, as it were, of that welcome, the two anthems, and of course, in a first, and in a sign of times changing as they should, that guard of honor led by a female officer of the Indian Air Force, Wing Commander Pooja Thakur. So that's a proud moment, I think, for all of us as women as well. So that's why I'm underlining that. Of course, since then, the president proceeded to Rajghat. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King have really been a point of bonding between the two leaders, of common shared history, values and conversation. And this is what President Obama wrote in the visitor's book. I'm just going to read that out at the Rajghat, saying, what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said then remains as true today. The spirit of Gandhi is very much alive in India today, and it remains a great gift to the world. May we always live in his spirit of love and peace among all people and nations. That's President Obama's message there. In brief comments, otherwise, he said that he was grateful for the hospitality, the extraordinary hospitality, as he called it, joking that it would be hard for him and for the United States of America to match this. Since then, of course, the President and the Prime Minister are at Delhi's Hyderabad house. The formal talks have begun. The two leaders will be meeting alone, and then delegation level talks will join them. There will also be some food. The Prime Minister, I beg your pardon, hosting lunch for the President. And of course, journalists already going crazy about what the President's banquet will have on the menu, where 250 eminent people of India will also be invited. Now we've got Sanjay Puri, the chairman of the US-India Political Action Committee, also joining us. Let me get first thoughts from you. Great expectations, great flavor, great atmospheric, great pictures. Both men have a sense of the media moment. They have a sense of the power of the image. What's beyond the image that you hope to carry back?
You know, for the past 2 years, Barkha, every leader that would come to the United States from India would always tell us that President Obama really doesn't care about India because he's indifferent to India. But
somebody actually said that to me in Washington when the Prime Minister was there, Stephen Cohen. Stephen
Yes.
Cohen said, India's not on President Obama's mind.
But this, now for once and for all, the argument is over. Whether it's symbolic or whatever it is, that it is in the 4-month period twice coming to this country and also being the guest, I think symbolically he's proving that India is on his mind and it's very important to him. So I think that's the one big symbolic value. But there is a lot more that goes out, I think, from a business standpoint. I think the nuclear deal, it's a big win for President Obama.
If it happens, we think it will, but we've often thought it will, and then at the last moment, it kind of falls through the cracks, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Philip, I come back to why there is very smart politics, foreign policy, strategy, and legacy seeking in Prime Minister Modi's decision to call the President. And we do now know that Narasimha Rao, when he was Prime Minister, tried to get Bill Clinton to come. It didn't fit in with his schedule. The State of the Union address that President Clinton had to address couldn't be changed. President Obama actually shifted it around.
Yes.
Why does this matter to him?
Because I think the elections in the United States this year and the last 2 years, so-called lame duck, have changed President Obama's view towards what he's going to achieve. It's made him much more forceful. He is, I agree, I think India is now very much on the list of countries we want a stronger foreign policy and a stronger economic policy with. And I think that's part of Barack Obama seeing 6 years of nothing happening and realizing the last 2 years he's got to make it happen. And I think India is going to be one of those topics he wants to happen.
Nish, do you want to come in on that? You know, I still remember Steve Cohen's words to me that India's not on President Obama's mind, and you people think it is, you know, you as in he meant the media, you're making too much of this, nothing's real going to improve in this equation. A number of Indians continue to believe that the Republicans are more interested in the Indian policy than the Democrats.
So I think actually the history of the United States is that the Democrats are more interested in India than the Republicans. But that aside, you know, I think India is always on America's mind and always has been. And there's no country with which the United States would like to have a close and really deeply integrated relationship than India. But the reality is that you have to be able to do something beyond the pomp and circumstance of the meetings and all of that we're talking about here in terms of the arrival. You have to actually get down to doing something, which in this case means targets on climate change that allow India to develop at a rapid pace, but also do something about global warming. It means actually, laying the foundation and breaking ground on some nuclear power plants in India, and it means that, attending a ceremony where Boeing and Philips are opening their new facilities. So I think that's where I think the relationship always gets caught up, is on both sides, where the United States says we want Indians here, but we're unable to move on immigration. And with the Indians, it's the same. It's we want to do something, we want your investment. Well, let's figure out a way to get immigration done. Let's figure out a way to break ground on some nuclear plants, and then I think you'll see things move. So I don't think it's ever an issue of not having India on the radar. It's a question of what are we actually going to do that's going to move the needle for 300 million Americans and 1 billion Indians.
Okay, I just want Sanjay and Philip to comment briefly on this question of India not mattering enough to Obama till this moment. You're saying it's finally settled the debate. You hear this often from Indians. The Republicans were more invested in India than the Democrats.
Well, because I think there was a significant situation that happened with President Bush, the nuclear deal. But I think you've got to understand, as he said, President Obama is now thinking legacy, legacies. This is now when President Bush's signature foreign policy success was the U.S.-India civil nuclear agreement. And I think President Obama has figured out ISIS, Syria, Palestine, Israel are going to outlive him beyond his presidency. They are intractable problems. But this is actually something he can win.
That's interesting. You drew the distinction between him being lame duck on domestic politics, but not on foreign policy.
No, he has freedom to make strong moves in foreign policy, and I think he will. I think the question is, do Democrats care about business? It's not the question about India. And yes, I think President Obama has shifted to being more focused on an economic legacy. And if you're talking economic legacy, you cannot ignore India.
So Washington to Delhi passes through Wall Street?
It does pass through Wall Street. And through Main Street, too.
Okay, and you've been very candid about that. You know, there's an effort sometimes to dress it up as other than being business-driven. You think it is business-driven?
I think a great deal is business-driven because there's job creation both in the U.S. and in India. We hope to have a manufacturing plant broken ground this year in India, a large one. And those kinds of movements bring our countries together.
Okay, Siddharth Varadarajan, senior journalist, strategic affairs expert, is also with us. Just a quick comment on everything we've seen so far. There is the argument being made that just President Obama being here in itself is such a powerful statement. These are two men who understand the power of the image. They're practitioners of politics of a kind that has a heavy emphasis on communication. Beyond that, are we realistically hoping for real progress on the nuclear deal? That's the word out from both sides. India offering an insurance pool for suppliers. The president probably accepting the Indian demand for IAEA's supervision or monitoring of fissile material being enough.
But I think the flagging or tracking issue is less of an obstacle, quite frankly, because this is in a way, a new demand that is not reflected in American law. And there was a 2011 GAO report on American nuclear material around the world, where the GAO, which is the sort of research arm of Congress, pulled up at the NRC for not keeping track of nuclear material, and the State Department gave a formal response where they said, when the IAEA is tracking this material, what's the need for us to do it? So it's a bit rich for this issue to now become.
So you're saying the liability remains the key issue?
I think liability is the bigger issue, and of the two, the insurance pool will address the.
But it's still not 1,500 crores.
No, the insurance pool can address the right of recourse issue, 17B, right? But the tortious liability, the fact that Indian victims under Section 46 can sue the operator and and supplier for false liability. In other words, if they feel that the accident was caused by something that the supplier did, that is an obstacle that I don't think can be wished away by reading down the law. I think it requires an amendment.
That's interesting. And I'm not sure that we were discussing earlier that for the BJP, politically an amendment is impossible.
I don't think they can. I mean,
Sushma Swaraj, you remember, it would be a big blunder if this law were not changed. I mean, can't they come back from that?
Swaraj and Jaitley, I mean, some of the strictest language was introduced by Mr. Jaitley as BJP
and yet, Raja,
leader
this morning you were saying, hey, come on, the law can be changed. How would they politically justify it? It's not the same as land acquisition, because that was Rahul Gandhi's baby. The liability was very much pushed by the BJP.
That was the age of Advani. Now we're in the age of Modi. So I think the whole...
Anything is possible.
No, the whole whole BJP's policy during when they were sitting in the opposition benches was just to oppose anything the government did. And they were also partly in alliance with the CPM, trying to pull down the government at any opportunity. But I think Modi has signaled a completely different course.
But wouldn't it be seen as some sort of sellout that you have a kind of parliament coming together vis-a-vis another country? Land acquisition is an internal debate in India. It becomes a completely different debate when it involves an external power.
I think you're going to see the Indian atomic energy community coming out and saying, look, if we don't do something about this liability law, what the Americans couldn't do to us of isolating India, today we've done it to ourselves. If we don't fix this, we are in a bigger soup.
And yet, Mr. Karju, you said law can't be touched. Do you agree with Siddharth that if the law can't be touched, then there remain real problems on the liability issue, that the insurance pool doesn't cover it? By the way, the insurance pool doesn't even cover the amount required, which is 1,500 crores.
No, there was some talk that there will be some sovereign guarantee given for that.
And that the Attorney General might make a statement or a declaration that this will not be misused.
With regard to Section 46.
Yeah.
I think a solution has to be found. That solution has to be both for Indian domestic industry as for foreign industry.
Yeah.
But I don't see politically, as of now, the BJP being in a position and Mr. Modi being in a position to change that law.
Yeah.
So therefore, a solution has to be found navigating around that law. And that is possible, provided the American business is willing to show a degree of pragmatism, because the question of tortuous liability, of course, remains. But if there is some kind of a clarification given by the AG, the Attorney General,
it would help.
But it would help. But at the end of the day, of course, this matter, if it reaches the courts, no one can...
Can I just make one quick point before, from the point of view of American companies, General Electric exported a reactor to Fukushima in the early 70s under a liability regime that left GE exposed to tortious claims.
Yeah.
Okay, and that exposure is haunting GE today. There's a case filed in a California court by American sailors who were contaminated by Fukushima. Yeah. They filed a case in the district court in California against GE as a supplier of that plant. So if GE could live with being exposed to tortious claims for 50 years from a plant exported to Japan, what's the issue with it being here?
Okay, now let me bring in Philip Bloomberg on that question. And also, another comment you made that really struck me. You said nuclear commerce is not as important for American companies that are here. That it's probably more important for India than it is for America.
Well, yes, I think it is more important. I think it derives, though, nuclear commerce derives into areas like climate change, like solar, like alternative energy, that is important to broader swaths. Remember, most American companies don't deal in nuclear commerce. I do think the tortious aspect of liability, remember, Americans are paranoid about it with justifiable cause. Our tort laws are terrible. And they open you up to liability that you may never have caused, but because you were there, you stand in the way.
So if the nuke deal doesn't move forward, would it matter so much to companies such as yours?
Yeah, I think it's a litmus test about tortious liability and how one will navigate that. Because if you're going to build products here in India, you want to understand the law that you'll be building into.
Okay, quick question to Nish Acharya. Nish, Dan Farrell of the US-India Business Council moments ago being very candid, saying, look, we don't know if the nuclear deal will move forward. Talking about IPR being the thorniest issue in the trade relation, talking about retrospective tax still being on the books a problem for American business. So where do you see the biggest problem area? I don't think he can hear me. We'll go back to him in just a moment. In the meantime, let's take a break from all this heavy talk of politics and diplomacy and Pakistan and China, and just listen to the young woman today who led the Guard of Honor for President Obama.
The Tri-Services ceremonial welcome to the most powerful man in the world. What were your thoughts going on in your mind?
Well, honestly, it was a very proud moment for me. Proud moment for me and for the Indian Air Force to be, you know, kind of creating history, to be the first woman officer to command Inter-Services Guard of Honor. And that too, like you say, for, you know, one of the most powerful men in the world.
And if I can ask, how many days of, you know, practice, trials did you guys go through?
See, when you talk about the Inter-Services Guard of Honor, yes, we get together and we practice for some time. But these are things which are inculcated in us right from the training days, wherein we're ready for any kind of ceremonials, parades and all. And we get up and we taught all this to take on any such task.
So it's in the stride as you go through. It's nothing.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you last one question. Seeing women officers like you do this, do you think the women, the younger girls are going to get more enthused in joining the forces?
I hope so. I hope it's be an inspiration for them to see that lady officers are commanding contingents of men and, are coming forth. And people are also accepting the same. So that's a message for everybody to come and join us, the services.
So it's not really tough. It's years and years of practice, and this perhaps is going to enthuse more and more young girls to join the forces. With camera person Arif, Shruti Ranjan Sen for NDTV 24/7.
All right, fantastic to see that there. A young woman, Pooja Thakur, Wing Commander of the Air Force, leading that guard of honor. Let me take it back to Nish. Nish, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so the question was that I was mentioning Diane Farrell of the US-India Business Council listing the problem areas. One, saying that ordinances are not a solution in themselves. Investors need the finality of legislative action. Two, saying it's a problem that the retrospective tax law is still there. Three, saying that IPR, especially in the pharma sector, is the thorniest issue in the trade relation. So what do you identify as the biggest problem area that isn't going to be resolved on this trip?
So again, I go back to two things. I think the two things that the President and the Prime Minister will spend the most time on are actually the geopolitical things that in fact impact 300 million Americans and 1 billion Indians. And first and foremost, that's climate change. And secondly, that's going to be the geopolitics related to Russia, the Middle East, and terrorism. The issues affecting specific businesses, whether it's pharmaceuticals, those aren't generally things that are brought up at the leadership level in terms of the President and the Prime Minister over the next 2 hours. That's something that will be done by Secretary Kerry, Minister Swaraj, and others. That's not going to take up too much time. Certainly the nuclear liability law may take some, but really the two issues are getting India on board as part of the global community in terms of climate change, and then getting India a little bit closer to U.S. interests in terms of issues like Russia, Iran, and the Middle East, and also understanding what India needs in order to do that, whether that's greater technology transfer, greater investment, just a meeting of the minds and a real movement towards each other and the center on those two major sort of presidential, prime ministerial issues related to geopolitics and climate change. I think far and above anything any business wants, those two things will take up the bulk of their 2 hours.
All right, Raja, just a quick comment, the reference to Russia. I remember Steve Cohen saying to me when Prime Minister Modi was there that, and I kept saying, what about Pakistan, your military aid to Pakistan, nothing really changes, etc. He said, what about you guys? You don't take a position on Russia.
Look, I think Russia is an important issue for the Americans. Indians don't want to get dragged into it. India has one main concern. Look, if Russia and America fight, we see China takes advantage.
Yeah.
That the Americans, in terms of their approach to Russia, is pushing them closer to China. That's our main concern. As far as Crimea was concerned, the Indian government made it quite clear. We don't accept forcible annexation of other territories and then do a referendum. Thanks to Vivek will know all about Kashmir, that we're not going to accept that at all. I mean, so that was stated privately, I think, quite clearly to them. But I think if you expect us to stand up and abuse Russia, India is not going to do it. But what is happening in the last few years, look, our engagement with America and the West has dramatically expanded. Russia today is largely limited to a set of strategic areas, but we don't want to abandon that relationship. I mean, you don't want to abandon your old friends.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Karjan?
You see, I think the relationship has reached a maturity where we can understand each other's compulsions.
Can we understand the American compulsions in Pakistan?
Of course, that's what I've been advocating right through. That we've reached a stage when we can have a conversation, we understand their compulsions, and they'll understand ours, say, on Russia.
Okay, I want to step into a break, but Philip, how much of this is also about containing China?
Well, I think China looms in the background, certainly from a trade partner and from a business perspective. It looms large. And we've had some friction over the last decades with China from a business perspective. India, we haven't felt the same way. In spite of these issues we talk about, it hasn't been an aggressive act from India. I think
But where is it easier to do business?
It's not easy to do business in either country. It isn't, candidly. There are other countries that are easier. But I think India is making a sincere effort to change that. China has to protect a whole lot of interests that are beyond the United States.
Quick comments from Siddharth and Sanjay and then a break on the China
I think China is very important. I think if you look at the joint statement that was issued when Prime Minister Modi went to Washington last year, you had a reference to South China Sea. You had a reference to the possibility of upgrading the trilateral interaction with Japan to foreign minister level. These are all part of an architecture that has China as its central focus. Right. So I think that I would expect that element to be pushed a bit further in this visit. Of course, the Indians remain concerned about the fears about China not becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So there is always the sense that the more you gang up or seem to be ganging up, the more you push China in a
certain
direction. Exactly.
Okay, Sanjay, quickly.
On China, I think it's a very simple situation. American businesses fear intellectual property loss with China. I mean, cyber theft.
But isn't that the same?
I don't think Indian government or Indian companies are spying on cyber security and stealing our secrets. That's a huge distinction, because our knowledge for pharma companies, his knowledge, etc., is everything we've got, and we all know what they're doing with our knowledge. So I think that's a big difference between India and China.
Don't forget Modi and Xi Jinping on a swing next to Sabarmati. So it's not as if we do something with Americans, we're going to abandon the relationship with the Chinese as well. We have other interests with China.
No, we have other interests. So do the Americans. But I think there's a whole area where the interests on China converge. And that is where we need to have a very candid conversation.
Okay, we're taking a quick break. When we come back, the view from Pakistan. And is India being unrealistic in expecting too much to happen, driven by Washington in Islamabad? What, for example, does this so-called call for banning the Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Hafiz Saeed really translate into on the ground? Welcome back. President Obama and Prime Minister Modi are in formal talks at the Hyderabad House. They are meeting alone to begin with. There's a walk and talk, according to the White House, at the Hyderabad House, where both leaders are expected to see if they can finally operationalize a nuclear deal that has been stalled effectively since 2008. Those pictures you're seeing are where the two leaders will be making a joint media statement. Journalists hoping they'll take a few questions as well. That's still not confirmed. All right, before Hyderabad House, the president was at Rajghat. Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi have been almost a kind of motif through this renewed conversation between Washington and New Delhi. Remember the trip, the non-scripted trip of President Obama and Prime Minister Modi to the Martin Luther Memorial in Washington. And today, of course, we are seeing the president leaving an impassioned note in the visitors book at the Rajghat. I'm just going to tell our viewers who are just joining us, there you can see that note, and this is what President Obama is writing. What Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said then remains true today. The spirit of Gandhi is very much alive in India today, and it remains a great gift to the world. May we always live in his spirit of love and peace among all people and nations. Ambassador Susan Rice, traveling with the president, is also adding her thoughts on Gandhi on Twitter. And let's bring that up now. This is what Susan Rice is tweeting. Gandhi's light and legacy lives on in our lives. His practices and principles are an inspiration to the civil rights movement in both the United States of America and the world. Philip.
I think that
constant referencing of Gandhi, more than ritualistic, more than tokenism?
Oh, I think it's very sincere and very deeply felt, not only because from the African American community that was the shining example, but because in today's world, the spirit of Mahatma Gandhi is needed more than ever. And I do think there's genuine and sincere warmth in President Obama's statements.
Sanjay, you know, President Obama in a program on YouTube said that if it weren't for Gandhi, he may not have even entered politics. So, you know, we're such jaded journalists that we think that people are just going through the motions of going to Rajghat, offering tributes, talking about how great Gandhi was. Is there something deeper here? Is this a kind of bonding moment between the two leaders? Because even Prime Minister Modi's gifts to President Obama, the audio-video clips of Martin Luther King, the Bhagavad Gita interpreted by the Mahatma.
Well, I think so. You know, who was Martin Luther King's inspiration? And you know, if you go to the White House and President Obama's office, he's got a statue of Martin Luther King. So there is definitely a commonality. There's a commonality of values, and I think this Prime Minister constantly talks about Mahatma Gandhi, and he talks about Martin Luther King, which is basically a commonality of values. So I think it's not just a photo op or a standard operating procedure. It's a lot beyond that.
So that politically as well, Mr. Modi has repeatedly invoked Mahatma Gandhi, you know, in many of his domestic campaigns as well. The politics of this moment, Mr. Modi, beyond being somebody who understands the power of the image, what is the political statement in this moment of President Obama being here?
No, for him, this is
I
mean, diplomatically and politically, it's a great triumph.
Yeah.
We know that previous prime ministers have tried to invite American presidents before.
Narasimha Rao and Bill Clinton.
Invited Bill Clinton. Trip couldn't happen. But
yeah.
So the fact that he could swing this and swing it barely 4 months after he met Obama in the White House, I think tells you something about the importance that Obama assigns to India and to India that's led by Modi. So in other words, there's an investment that the US is willing to make based on the assumption that Modi will deliver things that Dr. Manmohan Singh, despite the bonhomie and the the statement that all Indians love you, President Bush, despite all of that stuff, Manmohan Singh in American eyes couldn't deliver. So there's a hope and an expectation on a whole host of issues, right? Liability, intellectual property. I'm not sure to what extent those hopes will be fulfilled, but I think that's what's propelling. And so for Mr. Modi, this is something that he can flaunt.
Okay, now pictures inside Hyderabad House. We need to bring those pictures up, please. We saw these pictures inside Hyderabad House where we couldn't actually tell what President Obama was holding up for Prime Minister Modi. You can see that blue folder there. We couldn't tell from this distance what it was. My colleague Pallav Bagla is inside Hyderabad House and he has some more details for us. Pallav, what do you know?
Well, what I have been told by my associate President Obama within the framework of the law, and the possibility of an insurance pool and a sovereign guarantee is what is on the cards. As far as the issue goes on tracking, which is Americans wanting to track nuclear materials, that is something which India is unlikely to give in to. Recall, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh himself had said that he will not allow American nuclear inspectors to roam around Indian nuclear plants.
Right.
So when it was said by the past Prime Minister, it is very unlikely that India will cave in and allow any other inspections other than inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Okay, Pallav.
So cautiously optimistic that there could be an announcement on the nuclear deal.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Also today from Lahore, Tariq Azim, who's with the PMLN, is with us. Mr. Azim, we're coming to you in a moment from now. I have to take a break, unfortunately. Coming back, I want to delve a little deeper into whether the relationship is actually dehyphenated or whether the contradictions in America's approach to Pakistan persist, and can India do anything about that realistically? Coming back in a moment from now.